I'm really grateful that we could get those details. We are going to have a panel discussion a little bit later on, and it's really an opportunity to unpack some of the things that Sito touched on that take us to the ground, that take us to these areas and the programs that they're running across various communities. So we'll get more substance as to how it works, and I think it could inspire some thinking and new ideas. Don't forget to use the hashtag BIS2023. Join the virtual conversation, their quizzes, their polls, and other activities going on online. So let's keep the room in here and the virtual room connected that way. The delegates in here can also participate on the virtual platform. Up next, we continue this dialogue around gender-based violence. And I think for me, having facilitated different conferences over the years, I particularly like this format because we don't only look at an issue and move on. It's actually been tackled from various angles, different perspectives, and we get to drill down into different aspects of it. So that overview from Sito was just a way of ushering us into this particular conversation. But next up, we have another speaker, a keynote on this issue. And we're hearing from someone who has immense experience, over 18 years of experience as a social impact executive working both in the private and the public sector. She's the CEO of Gender-Based Violence Response Fund. And I think, as we know, ending gender-based violence is going to require a shift. It's going to require a change in society, a change in societal attitudes, including in the workplace. And we know that business can be a great force for good. So with that, let's hear what our next speaker has to say on the issue. Let's welcome Sazini Mojapelo, GBVF Response Fund.
Good morning. I thank you for inviting me to speak today. I have a long-standing relationship with Trialogue, and it's good to see Nick and Kathy continue being the bridge between business and civil society. I encourage that work. And it is an honor to give the keynote address this morning. It's good to hear from Vodacom. They have been a long-standing supporter around gender-based violence. Morning. Somewhere in South Africa, a woman or a child is being abused and assaulted, even killed, as you heard from Sito. Gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa has become a blight in our nation, and the shadow pandemic, as the president has said. It is one of the most pervasive violations of the basic human rights, yet the least prosecuted crime in our nation. The complexity is that it's mainly in the intimate partner violence space, domestic violence, which is couched with a myriad of factors: finance, money, cultural, traditional norms, faith, belief systems, that silence the voices of victims. The police minister has reported a number of stats this year and over the years that show the high rape incidents that took place at home against women and children. However, for us in South Africa, it moves beyond the private space. It's in the public space now. It has become a scourge driven in part, yes, by the slow prosecution of perpetrators. And as we sit here today, many of us will remember Uyinene, the UCT student who just went to the post office to get a parcel from her mom. Jess Hess, you don't remember, from UWC. And many others who I cannot mention at this point have died, unfortunately, in the hands of men. The statistics show that 1 in 3 women have been abused in their lifetime. The flip side of that is that 1 in 3 men have been perpetrators of abuse or violence against women and children. Let me let that sink in. The police figures, as you'll see here, show that 10,818 rape cases were reported in the first quarter of 2022, a 13.7% increase from the previous year. In 2023, the numbers remain. The country has the highest rape incidence in the world, and Ulusikisiki in Eastern Cape being known as the rape capital of the world. Earlier, we spoke about being active citizens. Songezo and I were in APSA together. He was head of comms, I was head of corporate citizenship. And we said, to your point, we need to raise our hands. We need to do something. It is not enough business leaders sitting here today, for us to stay where we are without doing something about the social ills that our country experiences. But at some point, in 2018, women across South Africa said enough is enough. If you will remember, before COVID, there was the total shutdown. Thousands of women brought the country to a standstill. We wore black. We all recognized how significant this moment was for women and children experiencing gender-based violence. It ceased to be a conversation that is happening in the court, reports in the police station, or at home. The fight was brought onto the streets. This marked a breaking point, where after many years of struggle, women could finally place their hopes in the development of a legally binding and far-reaching national plan to combat gender-based violence. These organizations took to the streets. They collaborated, they coordinated, and they pulled together to hold government to account. Because I am addressing business and society, because I'm addressing business leaders today, where were you? Civil society cannot do it alone. Government cannot do it alone. You as employers and employees need to collaborate and see how we bring an end to this. Thank you. Out of the total shutdown, an interim steering committee was formed to come up with a national strategic plan against gender-based violence and femicide. I am sad to say business was not there still. It's not that we are not there. I'll say we because I just left APSA last year. And I led a black movement, hashtag Wednesday, what. But it's not that we are not there, right? 1 in 3, look around the room. Look in your offices, 1 in 3. We cannot keep quiet. It was a participatory process. It was a consultative process. And a national strategic plan was born. Yes, it built on other policies, domestic violence acts, other strategic plans that had been put in place, work that had been done in civil society organizations. Business was still silent. It is the silence that kills us. It was not recognizing that your PA, your manager, is facing abuse, and something needs to be done about it. Gender-based violence in our country is a pandemic. Well, epidemic, because it's only in South Africa. The National Strategic Plan provides a detailed guidance on how to create a holistic approach that is anchored on 6 pillars. You will see them there on the screen. I thought of delivering this address and just speak. But I like when I present, when I see slides, because when I'm in similar conferences, I take pictures so I can remember what was spoken. So this is the NSP. The NSP has 6 pillars, from prevention to justice and safety, response care, support and healing, economic power, research, and information management. This is publicly available. So as a country, we have a plan. And this plan was launched by the president in 2019 with over 400 organizations represented. I'm happy to say at this point, private sector started participating, started listening, started thinking about how to collaborate and what it would mean for us to add our voice to the fight against gender-based violence. For an effective response to this violence, different sectors in society must work together. There can be no other way. 1 in 3. 1, 2, 3. Private sector, public sector, civil society organizations. As a people, we share the belief that there can be no gender equality until women and girls are safe and their rights upheld. This key indicator is even included in the SDGs, SDG 5, that looks at gender equality. For us to be able to deliver against the fight against gender-based violence, it is important for us to start looking at how we can eliminate it in the world of work. So very often we will look in the world of work and ask ourselves, what is it that is being done? What are we doing in our workspaces? When I was in corporate, it was challenging because it sits in the HR. It was challenging because it's the labor law. It is compliance. It is only after the fact that violence against women is dealt with within the frame of sexual harassment or whistleblowing, there's no move for prevention. There's no creating a zero-tolerance environment, which is what we should be doing. This slide is quite important. When you look at it from a world of work perspective, what you're doing within the company. However, it's also important to create an environment within the workspace that also mirrors that of what we see in the NSP. It's very easy to do. We need to move beyond compliance. We need to ask ourselves, what is it that we can do within the company that I work for? Yes, I'll use the example of my own experience. At ABSA, one day I'll stop wearing red. I worked with like-minded women in the organization, and we moved to create a women's manifesto. And the women's manifesto spoke to how we can prevent gender-based violence, but how we drive gender equality, how we deal with gender parity. There are many instruments or tools, frameworks that we can adopt as companies that can support the fight against gender-based violence. How we commit to gender equality in the organization. Especially looking at diversity and inclusion, looking at the LGBTQ+ community, how their rights are protected and what that means. We don't want to deal with after the fact. I want it from the call center all the way up to the MDs to know that you're protected within the world of work. What is good about the frameworks you see on the screen, for example, the ILO C190, it describes the world of work as intersection between domestic and private sector. A woman who comes to work, a woman who is absent from work. In a study done by KPMG, they found that the cost of gender-based violence within corporate South Africa and private sector was close to 42.4 billion. Money that we could use to deal with the ESCOM issues. We cannot be silent, we cannot not do anything about it. With this call to action, I am happy to say, to some extent, that's why I exist. The fund was launched. The fund was predominantly launched as a private sector response to gender-based violence. And the role of the fund, as you will see on the screen, is catalytic in the fight against gender-based violence. We amplify, we fund, obviously. We convene stakeholders to accelerate action against gender-based violence. But most importantly as well, we're an accountability partner. Pillar 1 speaks to accountability. How do we hold government to account? Very recently, we heard the Minister of Police speak to the fact that the DNA backlog had been cleared. We want to know how. The last stats that were reported 2 years ago mentioned a number close to 200,000. And in a space of 2 years, it's cleared. Working with civil society organizations, we shall be catalytic, but we will also be we'll hold accountability in the spaces where we should. And I'm not encouraging activism, which I am sometimes, but I am saying in your spaces, hold your leaders to account. And if you're the leader, hold yourself to account and your company to account. Your shareholders, your board. So this fund actually has, on its launch, had over 60% of the funding received came from corporate South Africa, from the private sector. 25% from global development organizations, 10% from philanthropic organizations. It was strategically set up to allow the private sector to also have a voice and make a meaningful contribution to the issues around gender-based violence, to the implementation of the National Strategic Plan. So if you are from private sector today or corporate, this is your fund. Do what you do internally, support the fund externally. To date, we have set up and established over the last 2 years strong governance framework. We've had leaders such as Dr. Judy Dlamini, Trifosa, Michael Katz from ENS, being in the board. We've had the civil society organizations, Sonke Gender Justice, Ilita Labantu, also sitting on the board. It is the first private sector civil society collaboration. We work very closely with the presidency, where we remain accountable to them as private sector vehicle of what we are doing. But we also make sure that we ignite the fight against gender-based violence by supporting grassroots organizations. Over 108 organizations have been supported to date. 4 are large organizations that are building capacity for 50 smaller community-based organizations. And our focus has been in the rural and informal sector communities, 45 GBVF hotspots we have supported. Our grants are small, but they ignite change. There's a lot of administration, there's a lot of work, but it's meaningful and purposeful work. In our first year, we dispersed 69 million. So it's not a small fund. It's got a lot of work to do. In our existence, we hope to have dispersed 500 million. The challenge is big enough. The change is required. The funds are needed. We have reached in the first 2 years 195,000 beneficiaries, supporting over 41,000 beneficiaries through training and awareness. I was in Umtata a few weeks ago, meeting with some community-based organizations fighting gender-based violence. It was a proud moment for me because I could see how we ignited change. Yes, a small grant, but big change and meaningful and purposeful change. So yes, the S that is in the ESG is important. And we need to make a meaningful contribution towards that. The challenge. I see Martin immediately stood up, and I was thinking, thank God he didn't stand up in my segment. Martin, who spoke earlier, is obsessed with this. What about the boys? What about the children in school? When I got the request to speak this morning, I said, yes, if Vodacom and Taki are involved, I'm there. They're the one corporate that has consistently focused in the schooling system. They've launched an app during COVID. They spoke out. They have comic books, I don't know if you know that help educate in a kid-friendly manner what gender-based violence is. It's good to see you, Taki, today. And I think more and more examples need to be brought to the fore. We cannot have a generation that is brought up in a country where gender-based violence is considered an epidemic. We're 1 in 3. When I speak about the children, you're an aunt, you're a mother, you're a father, you're an uncle, you're a brother. We cannot allow this epidemic to continue. We call on the men to reverse toxic masculinity, to be positive role models. And I know there are many, but you're silent. We need to hear more from you. If we stand together and we stand united, we can end gender-based violence in South Africa. I thank you.